All right, guys, welcome to the first review lecture. This is going to cover Unit 1. Now, it's important to remember that these are just very basic reviews. There's still a lot of detail that you need to review yourself, going through your AMSCO textbooks, the AP Daily videos, as well as the original notes, which are more detailed. This is just to remind you of kind of the big concept things that we learned in Unit 1. So don't rely solely on this to review for the AP exam, but it is a good start. What I suggest that you do is have a piece of paper out when you're going over these review PowerPoints and write down the things that you know that you need to review more of. Right, so that's how you guys should be using these review PowerPoints. So the big picture ideas that we're going to cover for our Unit 1 review are latitude and longitude, absolute versus relative location, site and situation, map projections, types of maps, scale, sense of place, spatial perspective, environmental determinism versus possibilism, geospatial technologies, and world regions and key countries. So a lot of students always think that, oh, latitude and longitude, that's so easy. I've been learning about it since elementary school. And yet these are the kind of easy questions that a lot of students mix up. So make sure you guys understand the difference between latitude and longitude. And one way that it's easy to remember for me is latitude, flatitude, which means they're the lines that go this direction. So they're also known as parallels because these lines never touch each other. And they measure in degrees, minutes, and seconds of the points north or south of the equator. So a lot of students get that mixed up and get questions wrong about that because to you, they're running east to west. But in fact, what they're actually measuring is north and south. So make sure you read the question very carefully if it's asking about latitude and longitude and you really think about the answer. Longitude are also known as meridians. These are the lines that run from the north to south pole. So they are not parallels. They all converge at those poles. And they also measure in distance in degrees, minutes, and seconds, but this time east and west of the prime meridian, which is the main line of longitude. Named after the main line, but also it goes through Greenwich, England. And we also measure time from this line. So it's also known as Greenwich Mean Time. So you also definitely need to know the difference between absolute versus relative location. Absolute location is the definitive location of a place using a recognized coordinate system. So those are those actual coordinates of latitude and longitude. That's your absolute location. And again, this is what GPS actually uses for everything in terms of location on the Earth's surface. Then relative location is the relationship of a place to another place or a nearby landmark. So this is how we usually talk in our daily lives, right? Like I live, near Lake Lanier and the Citgo gas station. That's my relative location. Site versus situation. Even though it's spelled S-I-T-E, think of site more like S-I-G-H-T. It's going to be those physical characteristics of a place. So this is things like climate, water sources, topography, soil, vegetation, latitude, and elevation. That's what site is. Situation is the location of a place relative to other places. So situation and relative location are the same thing. And this is, again, how most of us actually talk to each other in our daily lives about places. So we're going to talk about map projections. Now remember, map projections all have problems, and that's because you cannot put the spherical surface of the Earth onto a flat map without problems. And those problems are called distortion. Maps can be distorted in terms of size, shape, distance, or direction. First up, we're going to talk about Mercator. Mercator is a very common projection. You see this one in the top right. And a really easy way to tell if you're looking at Mercator is if Greenland looks like it's the size of Africa, then it's a Mercator projection because Mercator distorts size near the poles. The further you get away from the equator, the more enlarged the land masses get compared to their actual size. In reality, Greenland is nowhere close to the size of Africa. So the benefit of Mercator is that shape is distorted very little. Direction is also very good, which means that this is a good map to use for navigation. The second type of projection you need to know is the good homosaline projection. This is the one that looks like a kind of like a peeled orange. And you can see here that shape and size are much better. You see how Europe and Russia in particular is not nearly as large on this as it is on Mercator. And the problem here, though, is distance. You can see North America and Europe look very far apart because there's this big, huge chunk taken out of it. So distance is the main distortion for the good homosaline. Type of projection you should know is the Robinson projection. This is also a very common projection that you'll see. So if you see these kind of curved edges to a map, that's going to typically be a Robinson projection. And what's good about Robinson is instead of picking one thing to distort very severely, Robinson actually distorts kind of everything just a little bit so that everything kind of looks correct, but everything is just off slightly. Then we have the Gall-Peters or the Peters projection. And Peters is kind of like the opposite of Mercator. Instead of distorting size, it distorts shape. So if you see a map and it looks like South America and Africa, those countries that are near the equator look stretched out, it's a Gall-Peters projection. Next, we're going to talk about types of maps. And maps really fit into two different categories. We have reference maps and thematic maps. Reference maps are things that are referring to something on the surface of the earth. So that's both political and physical maps. You're either referring to, that country or you're referring to that mountain range. Those are reference maps. The other type of map is a thematic map, and a thematic map shows us some type of theme or data. This could be things like elevation, climate, population, vegetation, land use. It could be things like where Starbucks are located and how many there are. Those are all themes. And there are 5 different types of thematic maps that you need to know. You need to know choropleth maps, which show the data using color or shading. You need to know dot distribution maps, which show whatever the theme is using a dot. A lot of times population is shown this way. 1 dot equals 1 million people. You have proportional or graduated symbol maps, which show some type of symbol that gets larger or smaller based on the data. You have isoline maps, which use lines that connect points of equal value. A lot of times that's used for elevation and precipitation. And then the 5th type of thematic map is a cartogram, which changes the size of the land based on the data. Next, we're going to talk about map scale. So scale refers specifically to the relationship of a feature size on a map and its actual size on the Earth's surface. There are 3 different ways that we can represent map scale. We have ratio or fraction, which actually shows us this in a fractional format. So 1 inch on the map equals 24,000 inches on the ground. Written scale, where it just writes it out, 1 inch equals 1 mile. Graphic scale, which actually shows you on a bar line so that you can take out a ruler and use a ruler to measure easily. So all of those are different types of map scale. It's also important to understand that when we're talking about scale of analysis, though, we're really talking about perspective. Are we looking at something from a local, a regional, or a global scale? And there will definitely be questions about scale of analysis on the AP exam. A sense of place. All humans have what we call a sense of place, and we're going to have the strongest sense of places for those places that we spend a lot of time. So your homes, your school, places where you go on vacation, these are going to be things where we actually have this local knowledge of the Earth's surface, and that's your sense of place. Spatial perspective really looks at things that happen on Earth in space and in different places. So this focuses on the location of humans as it relates to interaction and studies the physical locations to determine how people live on the Earth's surface. That's looking at things from a spatial perspective. Definitely understand environmental determinism versus possibilism. Environmental determinism used to be a very popular idea with geographers in the 18 and even early 1900s. This idea that really it's completely the environment that determines, how successful humans are going to be. So this argues that the general laws sought by human geographers could be found in the physical science. And geography was the study of how the environment caused our activities. And these are just some examples of some famous previous geographers who believed in environmental determinism. If you guys remember from the beginning of the year when you watched Guns, Germs, and Steel, that was definitely a deterministic kind of outlook that these places became developed because they had the good resources, right? They had the good crops and the good animals. That's very deterministic. Geographers today, though, are possibilists. And possibilists believe that, yes, of course, the environment is important, but that people have the ability to adjust to their human actions, and they can develop technologies that make it possible for them to thrive in environments that they shouldn't necessarily be able to thrive in. Important thing you should know from Unit 1 is geospatial technologies. So remote sensing is any way that you are capturing information about the Earth's surface from above the Earth's surface. So this could be satellites, this could be weather balloons, this could be drones, anything if you are remote, meaning above the Earth's surface, that is remote sensing. Now, a lot of times students get that confused with GPS because GPS does use remote sensing because it uses satellites. But GPS specifically is using satellites for navigation. It is global positioning system, and it is how we mainly get around now for navigation. And all of us basically have it in our pockets because it's now in our cell phones, and it has made navigating so much easier than before GPS. GIS stands for Geographic Information System, and this is that computer system that stores and analyzes geographic data. And this is what today basically every single company, every single school district, everything today uses GIS technology to determine where should they put their next store, where should they put their next school, how should they redistrict their school district. For politics, it's how legislative districts are redistricted. Everything today uses GIS technology to determine the location of things. The final slide is perhaps the most important slide on this entire review PowerPoint, because if you do not know the world regions, you are going to miss questions on every single unit for the AP exam. You have to 100% know the world regions in order to get questions correct about population and culture and political geography and agriculture. All of the different units, you have to know these regions. So please take a second, make sure you understand the big picture regions, which is this top map, like North America, Central America, South America, Northern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, etc. And then really make sure you understand this bottom map, which is kind of the more broken down regions. Make sure you understand what is Latin America versus United States and Canada. Where is North Africa? Where is West Africa, East Africa? Southern Africa, East Europe versus West Europe, Southeast Asia versus South Asia, because you will get questions incorrect again on every single unit if you do not know these regions. All right, guys, that concludes it for Unit 1 review. Also, this week we're going to review Unit 2, which is population and migration. So thank you guys for paying attention. Again, this is not everything you need to know from Unit 1, but it is the really big picture ideas.